So today I have on the podcast Christy Morrell Stinson. I met you a couple years ago and was blown away by the phone conversation, just the phone conversation we had the first time. I got off the phone. I told my husband, I was like, that is one smart woman. Literally, I still remember to this day because the things that you talked about when speaking about business acquisition was when I spoke with you was just much higher level than what I had heard in that moment. And so happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you,
And
Marissa.
let's talk a little bit about what you do and what you're doing. I don't know if you're doing that in joint with your husband or what, but let's kind of get into the weeds a little bit.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the broader picture. So, my husband and I together, we work with visionary founders. Oftentimes, he's working more on the Act Two or Act Three, like what happens after you sell or after you really found that financial freedom and you're not so much in the day to day. And so he's focused on what's that philanthropy vision that you have, and how do
Right.
we really elevate you to start making the difference in the world that you long to make. And so I'm more on the front end where I'm working with visionary founders, oftentimes in the real estate sector or finance sector. There's a lot of investment going on. Um, Maybe it's not part of their day-to-day business. Maybe they just personally are investing, or their business is investing, or they're in that space, right? So, I mean, example is a fix and flip uh, couple that's really looking to expand and hire employees and get to that next level. That's one type of client I've worked with. I've worked with retail owners who they own the commercial building, but their focus is more on their retail business. And the question is, how do we find the right investors to come in and maybe take the heavy lifting on the real estate ownership and property management? Maybe we take some chips off the table and we put those into our retail business and expand that, and we become more of a tenant or passive income
Mm,
from the real estate. So that's just a broad swipe. Does that help to answer your
yeah.
question, get us started?
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, what do you think is the difference between a visionary founder and a
Mm,
different type of founder? Because you use
sure.
that
Well,
word.
I do use that word really specifically, and it's over the years what I've found is my favorite clients and the ones that seem to seek me out are people who have a purpose behind their business. They didn't just fall into it. They have a passion for what they're doing, and they have a drive to really take it to create some type of legacy. And so I focus a lot on the transferable value of a business, and that includes its real estate assets. And I focus on the transferable legacy of a business, which is that purpose and how do you embed it into your systems, into your
Mm.
brand, and all of your business systems.
Can you give us an example of that? So I mean, this is all fresh, right? That from what I'm listening to. So I've heard of transferable value, but transferable legacy, I mean, that's a new term for me. So,
Sure. Yeah. So if you think about your business having a purpose and what does it stand for, and what are your values as the business owner, as the investor in the business? Maybe you acquired it, maybe you didn't found it. So is the business expressing your values in the marketplace? How is your brand really communicating that? And when I say brand, I also mean culture, because it's just the other side of brand. It's looking inward, right? It's the team understanding how to work with each other. How are your values expressed in the way that your team behaves, in the way that they communicate, and the way that your marketing materials speak for you when you're not in the room, in the way that your systems are designed and your processes are designed? All of this is part of embedding your legacy into the business so that when you pass it on to someone else, it continues to express something that's consistent with what you started it for.
hmm. And the founders that you work with, are they trying to transfer onto like their kids or just sell to,
Hmm.
any other, person that may want to acquire the business?
Yes, and right. Um, so both. I'll think of a recent client I worked with. She had started her business from scratch. She founded she was working in the behavioral therapy, marriage and family therapy world, and she built the business brick by brick, if you will. Started out in a single location, added a few therapists to her practice, and from there expanded and expanded and expanded again. And her daughter was working in the business. After about the first 5 or 8 years of the business starting, her daughter stepped in and started working as as a manager in the business, not delivering the technical services, which is the therapy, but rather she stepped in as more of an operator. And they did a transition last year where mom sold to the daughter, and I was able to help to facilitate that. And so we shored up the processes. We made sure that we walked through a methodology that identified value across every area of the business. We looked for any gaps, and we looked for what are the values of the business, so that that was clear and being passed on, so that 10 years later, mom can look back and say, yeah, you know what, this business has taken on new life. It's taken on a new aspect, but it still has those foundational values that were important to me when I started it.
Yeah, I mean, how difficult is it to keep foundational values in a business once it's transferred? Because I mean, you hear of people that make, generations of wealth within
Mm.
their business, but then a lot of times by the third generation, it's lost. So I would assume by the time, and I've seen people that have bought and sold businesses, and then once they're sold, the business is completely different.
Yep.
So how can you make sure that your business, even once it's sold, especially if you're a founder, you care about it so much,
Mhm.
how those values are still instilled when you're no longer operating it?
That's going to have a lot to do with how you develop the brand of the business. And, the more depth, the more intention that you put into that, the more that's going to carry forward, because that's going to be part of the value of the business. And it's going to be a lot of work to change that. If that's just a surface skim and it's really easy to just, make changes after the sale, then it's probably not going to stick. And for some people, it's more important than others, right? So we emphasize it when it's important to the founder, and that's work that I'm particularly gifted at, or have done. It's not always part of the equation, right? As you said, sometimes you just want to find someone on the market to take your business, and you just want to make sure that they're an ethical buyer and that they're going to grow the business the way they want to. And the real estate aspect of it, I mean, I don't want to miss that piece. Maybe we come back to that. But oftentimes, if we're just talking about value, that's going to be a big part of the business value, is what holdings does it have, and also intellectual property, business systems, how well have you developed the workforce, and how deep is the bench. If you lose a key employee, what's going to be the effect on the business. All of those things will come into play.
Hmm. How do you think some of these founders that you work with, how have they found their key employees, and um, how do you attract, I guess, the best team?
Wow, now there's a big question, right? Like, I mean, we even do retreats on this topic. It's not an easy question to answer. I was just reading the latest Gallup poll, and 21% of people are unhappy in their job. 33% don't feel well on a day-to-day basis. I mean, so there's a engagement disease, right, that we're dealing with in the U.S. and abroad. And so, how do you find those people? Again, it's going to come back to values. People want to work somewhere where there's some meaning. They want to work somewhere where they feel cared for. It's really basic human relationship. They feel cared
Right.
for, and they feel like their voice matters, and they have something they can bring to the table, and that their work is making a difference in the lives of others. So if you can translate that into your business, regardless of what you're selling, whether it's a product or a service, there's still a way to create a human experience through the interaction with you and your team. I believe the key is found in the owner or management that represents the owner, caring for the team so the team can care for the customers and clients in the marketplace.
Mm. What are some practical ways of relating, I guess, what one employee's job is bringing meaning to the world, or to, whatever it is that they're trying to impact as a business? Because I think that correlation is often lost when you're doing maybe something task oriented, or it's necessary for the business, but how can owners kind of bridge that, like create that bridge of, look, you doing this actually gives us this meaning in the world?
I think that you've got to be in communication with your team, right? And find ways to get out of the workspace now and then and do something that's a little more vision oriented. It's really on the founders, it's really on the management team to communicate, this is where we're going, this is who we are, and to continue to be very consistent in communicating that. Not just throw a poster up on the wall and expect that everybody's going to read it. And it's more about the conversation that you're having ongoing with your team. Obviously, some of our day-to-day work is routine. I mean, there's not always, great meaning in, responding to an email or sending making copies, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can tie your work to the bigger picture and understand, if I'm successful in this piece, it empowers my company to achieve their goals, and to show up in the marketplace in a way that people respond to. So whether you're a clerk behind a counter, or you're counting beans in the back room, if you understand how your job fits with the bigger picture and you understand the vision of the company, that's gonna translate pretty well.
Is there a company that you would say that does this really well, like a well-known company, I guess, that people could correlate it to?
That's a great question, Maritza. I'm not sure if one comes to mind off the top of my head. I mean, I think we've all heard about Apple as being, held out there as a company that's been really, really good at this. If I was going to pick a giant, I might pick Apple. But when it comes to smaller companies, I'd like to find a few and maybe send them your way, and maybe we talk about that a little more in depth.
Yeah, for sure. Have you seen also, just because you speak with so many business owners, have you found one of the biggest differences in visionary founders to just people that are just trying to make, like you wrote in your email to me, right? Like side hustle income, to people that are really making certain amount of money? Is there always a purpose correlated to the business, or have you seen some kind of correlation between people that are really making a difference as far as income and impact?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I can correlate higher income and higher earnings with purpose. I mean, I suspect that there's a correlation, but without having data to support that, I don't know that I could say. I do know this, is that having a purpose drives you through the tough times and you approach things differently. Having a purpose changes the way that you engage with your team. It changes the conversation, right? When it's just business for the sake of profit, which if you're in business, profit's important. Cash flow is important. These are lifeblood of the business, so you can't ignore that and say, well, we're a social enterprise, we don't care about profit. It's both, and there has to be a balance there. But I do think that it really does change the conversation, and I think that it creates for longevity. Businesses go through a life cycle, and there is a point where they plateau, and they can dissipate over time. And we saw the rise and fall of Kmart. We've seen the rise and fall of other retail giants, a rise and fall of banks, even that became over leveraged. And so you have to balance these things of the profitability with why are we here? What difference do we make? If we're just a commodity, then we're competing only on price. That's a losing game.
Yeah. And with I'm sure a lot of people are concerned right now with talks of, the recession. How long will that last? You mentioned that purpose is what helps you kind of pull through the hard times. What's some advice you would give to people that are concerned about the recession, that are founders or are business owners, on things that maybe they should address, or tips that you would give
Mm.
them to be able to come out of this thriving?
Be ready to pivot when you need to. In every turn of the market, there's opportunities. If you're really stuck in a certain way of doing things or a certain way of seeing things that worked really well when your market was thriving and now you're seeing some retraction, you want to be really strategic in how you shift. And don't be afraid to make changes when you need to make changes. I mean, I think that's really important. And I think when people get really stuck in this is what worked before and they just try to do let me just work harder but keep doing the
Yeah.
same work, that's not always gonna bear the right fruit. So I think it's that ability to strategically plan, to get out of the business and really look at the whole landscape and really be in touch with the market. Look at what your competitors are doing. Have wise counsel. I think if I can give any tip at all, it would be have wise counsel. If you're just in your own head, you're going to miss something. We all have blind spots. So having wise counsel around you, that could be advisors. I would say you don't want just one financial planner. You want a couple of different advisors coming from different perspectives. Tap the wisdom of people who've been there, and make sure that you have a good coach on your team. A good coach will hold up a mirror and help you see yourself and see what you're doing in a different way and help you see your blind spots.
Hmm. What are some blind spots that you've identified in the owners that you have coached that maybe are, a common thread?
Hmm. Um, I think blind spots will fall into a couple of categories: how I use my time, how I communicate, how I come across to people. That's a big one. This is just how I am, take it or leave it. Well, you could work on your communication skills and maybe get a different result. In a time of recession, it's the time to really double down on your character, your communication abilities. It's all of those basics of interacting with other human beings that are going to really make the difference. Sometimes it's your social capital that's going to get you through a tough time. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
100%. I 100% agree with that. And what are some ways that maybe you have found that people have improved their communication or their brand? Because I feel like a lot of it has to do with brand. Whether you have a business or you don't, you are a brand. You just,
Right.
People have an opinion, by the way that you speak, the way you dress, the things, the way you handle yourself and your character. So what are some things that you would recommend for people to improve their brand, I guess, whether it's a business or, just someone, just a general person, right, that doesn't have a business?
Okay, so I'm going to take your question and I'm going to purpose it toward the conversation that you and I had a little earlier, where we were talking about how there's maybe a segment of your audience is really into multifamily investment, right? And I worked with a multifamily developer to create a new concept development in a small town, quasi small town, maybe 50,000, 60,000 people. And before they finalized design on this new, I think it was going to be like 200 door complex, we did some neighborhood focus groups and really got out there into the community. Here's my answer to your question: listen to your market, get in conversation with people. What are they looking for? What do they need? Those needs might shift over time. Are you serving a luxury community, or are you serving more of a everyday workforce community? What does the city need? So it's listening to the different stakeholders of your project that are going to make a difference. And you can apply what I just said to any type of company. Listen to your stakeholders, listen to your market. And if we're looking at the internal side of the company, listen to your employees and people who are the demographic to work for you. I think that we live in a time where it's easier to get that reflection, right? We get Google reviews, we get Glassdoor reviews. There's all these ways for people to reflect back to us. Don't reject the tough feedback. Take hold of it and go, what about this is true? What about this is useful? It's really easy for us to kick back and just be in pride and say, that's not right. That person was just disgruntled and they said bad things about us, or they don't like our project because they're a smaller community and they don't want a larger 4-story a multifamily development in the community. It's just as an example, which is what we ran into in that small town, right? A lot of resistance to a bigger complex. Listen to the tougher feedback and find a way to engage people that takes on more of a position of humility and listen. Still, make the decisions that you need to make. But I think it's in that listening where the keys can be found. What do you think?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is your brand, if you think about it, has a lot to do with the needs of other people instead of what you think it should be or what you created in your mind. But the way that you provide value in the marketplace is by understanding the people around you and what they need, and then fulfilling that need in one way or another, right?
Yes.
So yeah, 100%. And take us back to what led you down this road of M&A and merger and acquisitions, helping business owners, and what brought you here? What even led Christy to this point?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I will say this: I didn't set out. When I was in my 20s and I had my real estate license and I was investing in properties and that sort of thing, I did not set out to work in business sales, mergers, and acquisitions. I kept meeting entrepreneurs who owned small businesses, all different size. I mean, small business can be up to 500 employees, right? I think the biggest company I worked with had about 700 employees at the time, and all the way to mom and pop, where there's just, family working in the business, maybe 2 or 3 people. I saw many situations where the owners were not prepared and they ran into life circumstances. And they ended up either closing the doors, just liquidating assets, or selling very quickly under duress. I also saw examples where people were very thoughtful and intentional and understood how their business fit into that larger marketplace of business investors and buyers. And they were able to be, I'll say, the head and not the tail, right? They were able to say, this is what I want, and this is how I'm going to go about that. And they spent time in preparation. I was very blessed to work alongside of other consulting firms that, I'm their junior and they're the senior in this space. And I've done a lot of supportive work that way. And that allowed me to work across a myriad of different scenarios, whether it was an internal transition or whether it was to a strategic buyer, or whether it was to a private equity firm or family office. And I saw, like I said, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it came back to, did you set an intention and did you take the time to prepare? Did you take the hard medicine of this is where we are and this is the state of things, and then choose to do the hard work to change that? I think sometimes people, again, sometimes blind spots are chosen, right? I don't want to look. I'm just trying to get from here to next Friday. I'm just trying to make payroll. You got to find a way to get out of the business long enough to look at it and understand it and make the shifts that you need to make in order to be prepared. So that's what led me into this world. It was a set of scenarios over time, and I just started shifting more and more towards consulting. Done a lot of coaching along the way, and I love the coaching piece. But I was very fortunate to work alongside of larger consulting companies that were in the M&A space, and I find that work really fulfilling.
What got you to work for a consulting firm? Like, how did you even get in the door, I guess, is my question.
Through relationships.
Mm.
Through
Always.
just being out there in the marketplace, networking, talking to people, being curious. I think curiosity is underrated. And I'm by nature an incredibly curious person.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Curiosity is what leads me to create all these questions. Just
Right.
um, and you know, my thinking is if someone is an owner right now and they have not set the intention to, they haven't even thought about exiting their company, right?
Right.
Um, what are some of the questions you would ask them to see where they want to take that business or how to even exit? Because I mean, eventually they're going to pass away, so something has to happen one way or another.
Sure. So there's going to be two sides to those questions, and one side's financial. That's the very practical, what do you need to earn? When you don't own this business anymore and this was your nest egg, this was your retirement plan,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes that's the case. They don't have another retirement plan. So let's have those financial conversations now, and let's start working towards some solutions that your business and also some of the income that you have coming to you could be put into a particular financial tool, such as Index Universal Life or some of these other really great tools out there. They have, fancy names, that can generate income for you in the future. Okay, so we want to know that the business, when you sell it, is going to provide you with enough money to live on, and that we're going to supplement that with some other tools. And if we have a little time, if we have, let's say, 5 to 8 years, or 10 years, we can really do some magic. If we're up against the wall and we only have 3 years, we can still get a lot done in 3 years. If you've got to sell in a year, there's not a lot of change that you can make in that time. But I've done that work as well to get you packaged up, and let's get you out there on the market. It might take 6 to 12 months to find that buyer.
Mm. How many businesses would you say typically do not sell in the marketplace that, I mean, they might be in duress or not, but
Yeah. Well, the statistics show that far more businesses do not sell, or do not sell at anything close to what the owner needs. Okay. And I can get you specific statistics on that. They shift every year. And I look to, I think it's the Exit Strategy Institute, and there's some others out there that publish those statistics. And I mean, the last time I checked, it was over 80% of owners were not achieving their transition goals.
hmm.
Um, and it came back to planning. It came back to investing the time to properly plan and investing the money to have the right team to help you do that. It's not a single advisor typically in these situations. I mean, if you're a very small company, perhaps a good business broker might get you there. But if you have a team of 10 or more people and you own real estate and that kind of thing, you're going to have a multidisciplined team of advisors that are working together on your behalf. They're not pulling in different directions. Everybody's lined up, from your accountant to your attorneys to whoever is coaching you, and who is providing the actual M&A advisory on your business.
Hmm. And I mean, since you mentioned that, it made me think about the fact that a lot of people that are in like the baby boomer generation, a lot of them
Mm-hmm.
own businesses.
Yep.
And now my generation, I'm a millennial. So it's a good opportunity for baby boomers that want to sell for millennials to essentially buy an existing business instead
Yep.
of starting from scratch. And maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but
Sure.
statistics show, right? It's probably would be better to buy something that is existing um, than starting from scratch. So if you're advising a baby boomer that wants to sell their business, what are some of the things that you would have them look out for in a millennial? Because I'm thinking it probably would be
Mm-hmm.
better. This would be a better plan for someone in the millennial age group to do as a way to start their wealth. But I think a lot of them are scared to. Um, so I just want to talk that through a little bit because I think that this is a good opportunity right now in the marketplace to be doing this.
So if I understand your question, it's how do you get those boomers who are thinking about selling, talking to millennials who may be open to buy as part of their investment strategy, or
Right.
even to, I mean, so there's different types of buyers, right? So let's talk about that for a minute. Let's just take a sidebar, talk about the different types of buyers. And so oftentimes, if you're talking about, just kind of grassroots buyers, it's lifestyle. They're buying a lifestyle, they're buying a job, they're going to buy a small business that they can run themselves and it's going to pay them an income, rather than I'm going to have this career and then own this, asset over here that I don't have to do much with, right? So if you're talking about heavily involved owner operator type, that's a lifestyle business is what I would call that.
Mm-hmm.
I helped a guy last week buy a pool service. He's going to go from pool to pool, make sure his customers are very happy and those pools are sparkly clean, and he's going to make a nice income by doing that. And he'll probably have one or two part-time contractors that work alongside of him doing that. That's a lifestyle business. Another type of buyer is like the family office or private equity firm. This is a group of people that have money to invest. They are looking for a particular type of return on investment. They're going to be looking for a business that has operators in place, and that is generating a certain level of owners' earnings, right? So that they are getting back the return that they're looking for. And they're probably going to invest in multiple businesses and then leverage the strengths of those businesses together. Another type of buyer is a strategic buyer. They are in a particular industry and they want to buy someone down the supply chain a bit, or they want to buy a competitor. Maybe they even want to buy a technology or something that they don't want to see come to the market because it's going to negatively impact their business. So a strategic buyer will buy maybe for a little bit more money because they have a strategic reason why this purchase is going to make a difference for their existing business. So they're more interested in preserving their existing cash flow than getting cash flow from the new business, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the strategic buyer. Those are three key types. I know there are others. Well, there's internal buyers, right? I've worked in this business for years. I would love to own it. I got into conversation with the owner and now they're making a pathway for me to buy it. Maybe I qualify for an SBA loan within 5 years and the owner, puts up some of my down payment and helps me transition into that ownership position, or an employee stock option or ESOP, where the employees are buying the business. So those are a couple other types of buyers. And then you've got your family buyer. And a lot of families have this mistaken idea that they're just going to hand the business to the next generation, but they're not thinking about how is the business going to provide me income in the future. So that has to balance out. I mean, I've seen situations where that balanced out very well because they did the work and had the conversations to talk about the financial side of it. And then I've seen where both generations felt very entitled and they just were not able to bridge the gap between what this generation expected versus what this generation expected.
Coming down to communication.
Communication. And so going back to your point about millennials purchasing, I would say if you are a millennial and you're interested in this sector, go beyond your commercial real estate holdings and look at businesses that maybe they're owner occupants of a building and get to know, what that sector looks like. Maybe work with a local commercial agent who can identify owner occupants in the sector you're interested in, whether it's industrial or it's retail. That's something I specialize in, is working with owner occupants. And helping them repurpose their commercial assets and bring in investment. That's a great way to set yourself up as a buyer of the business in the future. Maybe you buy the commercial property and then you position yourself as first option for when the business is ready to sell. That would be one way to do it. But definitely, Maritza, the conversation between the generations is really important. Networking, just getting out into the community and talking to people in the sector that you're interested in.
How would you help identify someone that is a buyer looking for an existing business? Let's say it's I'm trying to put it into one of the categories you mentioned, but it's probably going to be either a lifestyle buyer, or
Mhm.
someone that wants an operator eventually. I know that's kind of going into the private equity space, but I'm
Okay.
thinking of someone that's saying, hey, I am making good money, but I'm thinking about my future and I need to have a business that operates on its own. I can maybe in the beginning really run it and help, but I want to get an operator in there. So how would you instruct that buyer? Like, what industry should you look for? What's a way to get in touch with these specific sellers and things like that? Like, just give us a rundown or an
Sure.
overview.
So, two questions you asked. One is, how would sellers get into conversation with buyers? How would they even know who those people are? And the other question you asked is, how would buyers find sellers and how would they know who those people are, right? Like if I pulled those two out. And I would say in both cases, that business broker or M&A intermediary is probably the good person for you to network with. If you're interested in a particular region, take a look at who's working in that space, who is buying, who's representing the buyers and sellers of businesses in that space, and talk to them. Oftentimes commercial real estate agents will play that role, but they're not necessarily the best equipped for it if they haven't actually gotten the training from the International Business Brokers Association, or there's an Alliance of Merger and Acquisition Professionals, AMNAA it's called. So there's some different credentials out there that you might want to look for. Those are really key. You don't want to just have any real estate agent represent you in the sale of a business. Even though people do it, it's fraught with risk,
Mm.
and if things go badly, you're not going to have the best representation necessarily. So I'm a big fan of the IBBA here in Florida. The Business Brokers of Florida. You're going to find that your best professionals are members of that association. So whatever state you're in, you want to find like that equivalent, and they're always going to be members of the IBBA or the AMNA. It's one of those types of organizations. They are going to be able to put you in touch with the other side. So if you're a seller, you're going to be able to talk with buyers. If you're a buyer, you're going to be able to look at listings. Try a few on, look at the financials. Practice looking at, okay, here's the price of the business. Here's what the last three profit and loss look like. Here's what the last three balance sheets look like. And here's the growth that I saw or the lack of growth that I saw. And understand why the business is priced the way it is. Have your own representation. I always say that, whether you're buying any type of real estate or business, have your own representation. Don't just go with the listing agent, because they represent the seller. So they have a duty to you to be fair and honest, but they don't have to. You want to find someone who can negotiate for you and really help you dig into the due diligence side of things.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say is healthy growth in a business
Mm.
year over year? Because you mentioned the financial statement, so like in a balance sheet, profit and loss. What's healthy growth for most businesses?
I like to see at least 12%. We say it CAGR, that annual growth rate. I like to see at least 12%. That's moderate. If a business really wants to, and they're in the right type of market, I mean, we can go for 10x in 3 years. That's one of my favorite scenarios. How are we gonna grow the revenues and the owner's earnings across 3 years very, very aggressively? But that requires a foundation to expand upon. That requires a very strong foundation. We have to know where the risks and gaps are so that we don't implode as we're
Right.
doing that expansion.
Yeah. So what are some ways to expand your revenue along with the EBITDA, right, or the owner's earnings? Because a lot of people will talk about their revenue,
Right.
but not what they're actually making. So
Right.
what are some ways that you would say to do both?
Well, first you got to know the state of things, right? So a very thorough evaluation of the business, not just looking at the P&L, but digging deep into the business and looking at all aspects of it. I have a tool that does that, and I love it because it shows us the value across 8 different areas of the business, across 400 different points or line items, if you will. And we can compare that then year over year, and we can do growth scenarios. Let me just think more about your question. What can you do to increase that? So the first thing is the state of things, right? You got to know your point A before you can start moving towards point B. And then you want to set your intentions. What are your objectives for growth? And then reverse engineer, right? I like to work my way backwards and say, what are the milestones then between here and there? And what are realistic timeframes to grow that? And yes, you're right. It's not just about top line growth. It's about optimizing the expense structure. It might be about capitalizing or recapitalizing the business. Looking at, you might need to reorganize financially. Maybe organic growth isn't going to get you there. So what's your capital strategy, and what's going to be the cost of capital, and how do you factor that in? Do you need to bring on a partner? Are you going to work with your local bank? What are your options? There's a lot of creative options out there too. I mean, there's different types of grants or funding, more so than there used to be at the county level or economic development authorities. Or economic development partners. So you want to get into conversation with those people and say, this is what I'm thinking. This is where we're going. And if you have a really good consultant on your team who understands that world, they're going to be able to create those conversations for you and really help you communicate well if you are looking for new capital for your business.
Nice. I like the capital side of things.
Right.
So, what are some common ways that people can go or just practical ways people can go and get capital? Like, would you prefer to go through a bank or finding a partner? I guess it depends on the business, but what are your favorite ways, I guess, to go and raise more capital?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's good old trusty SBA, right? And especially if there's real estate involved. I like to look at, shall we roll up some smaller businesses or some competitors? Maybe there's another business on the market that's a great fit for us, and maybe it has some real estate attached to it. So we could do like an SBA 504 or something like that. And that can move pretty quickly. So that's one of my favorites, is to do the roll-up approach, or acquisition, growth by acquisition. Partnerships are tricky. Partnerships can be really, really great if they're well thought out and well documented, and everybody's expectation is so clearly documented and there's a plan in place. When buddies come together and they say, okay, well, let's do this thing, and then they don't really take the time to document what that looks like, they can be using the same language and misunderstand each other. And when money starts mattering, that's when partnerships can go awry. So it's really important to define a partnership very, very clearly. And other types of capital, I mean, I really think that you want to be in conversation with your economic developers and say, this is what I want to do. What do you suggest? And there might be a program at your state. I was a lot more familiar with the programs in Minnesota because that's where I cut my teeth on all of this. And I've been in Florida now for about, coming up on 3 years. So I'm learning Florida.
Nice. And I'm just curious as to, what do you enjoy about this part of your career, right? What do you enjoy about working with these founders? And what's your favorite part of it all?
My favorite part is when we take the invisible ideas and aspirations of a founder or somebody who's purchased a business, and we put those into a strategic planning framework. Because now we're translating something that you couldn't touch or feel, and we're translating it to a very practical way to move forward. I love that. I would say that's probably one of my favorite aspects of this business. And on the other side, when people have had a successful sale and now they can decide what they want to do with the next era of their life, that's a beautiful place to be as well.
For sure. I take it that you're more of a operator, integrator type of person. I know you're visionary as well, but it seems like that comes very naturally for you. Is that something that you developed, or is that just a natural talent, I guess?
That's a great question. I'm not sure, but I've always been attracted to that side of things, is to look at the operations of the business and pull it apart. I was very, very blessed in my early 20s to be in a high tech company that was experiencing tremendous growth. It was a leader in its industry. I got to watch 2 merger and acquisition deals go down inside that company. The first was some private investors bought the company, or private equity firm, I think it was, bought the company, and they brought in like a high-powered CEO and quality systems team, and they put into place business systems. And I was on the audit team when all of that happened, for the International Standards Organization, and I was able to see the company through the lens of, this is the whole picture, this is how manufacturing and logistics and service and finance and marketing and sales all work together. And here's how the leadership of the company and the planning side of it drives all of that. And so I had that lens very early on. And when I would meet entrepreneurs later, as a real estate agent, I kept meeting small business owners, as I shared. And I would find that they just didn't have any systems, and they didn't see their business through that type of a lens. And by being able to get in there and bring some operational excellence to the business, it just was very transformative for the business owners who were willing to do that work.
Yeah. And what are some of the systems that you think need to be implemented in, let's say, a real estate firm, right? A real estate investment firm. What are some of the systems that you would implement into someone that is raising capital and doing a syndication, as an example?
Okay, so front of house type of standard operating procedures, right? How do you find the people that are going to be involved? How do you find your deals? How do you vet them and do your due diligence? And on the other side of that, how do you manage your portfolio, right? Like, how do you, if you're going to own real estate or business or both, there's a management aspect to that portfolio. So it's taking all of that and organizing it into standard operating procedures and finding, what is your process for doing this, and taking the time to do that process mapping. People can be really, really good at what they do, and a lot of it can be taking place in their head, and they're moving very, very fast, and they didn't take the time to document it, as if somebody who knows nothing would be able to look at that process and at least understand the steps that are in it, even if they didn't have the technical skills to execute. And so it's that level of documentation, I guess, that comes to my mind. And then, doing an evaluation of the enterprise to see what's in place and what is not. Comparing your size of business with others like it and looking to see what they have in place. You don't want to overburden a small entrepreneurial firm with too much system, right? You got to right size it. But if you're trying to do too much too fast and you haven't clarified your way of doing things, there's opportunity cost there for sure.
How do you know when you have too much system in a smaller business?
You're spending too much time in administration and not enough time actually just making the deals happen. So, you want to be able to look at how you're spending time, and also the cost, right? Like, so there's a time cost and there's a expense cost. And so you want that to stay below a certain percentage, maybe it's 5 or 10% in both areas.
5 or 10% of your time in both the systems and then the deal making?
5 to 10% of your time developing systems versus actually doing the work of the business, right? Yeah. And that's just, I just pulled that number out of the air. You depend on the business and how fast you want to go, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's important sometimes to have an operator that's just skilled in that than trying to do it all yourself, because it's, you only have 24 hours in the day. So,
Yes.
But Christy, this was very informative for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wanted to know what kind of business owners are you looking to work with, and how can people connect with you, right? What who would be your client, or that you would like to work with?
There's two sides of that. I'd like to be in more communication with investors who are looking at retail and industrial investments and would be willing to talk to owner operators about putting together like a lease back situation where they come in and over time, they gain their return on investment, but they're willing to make some concessions for that owner occupant to transition out of ownership of the real estate. And they're willing to put together, a deal that's balanced for both parties. So that's one side. And the other side is those owner occupants in retail and industrial who are feeling like, I really need to focus on my business. I feel pulled in a couple of different directions. The repairs and maintenance are really starting to add up for me. I don't have a property management background. And especially if they have a standalone facility, and they own the whole real estate, that can get to be a really heavy burden for them. And they may have been advised that in order to win they need to be the owner of the real estate, but it's not always the best fit long term, and there's other ways to win.
Yeah, love it. And what's the best way for them to contact you?
Sure. Well, I am going to give you a mobile number because text is always the fastest and best way to reach someone. But you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'll share that in just a minute. But if somebody wanted to text me, I've kept my personal Minnesota number at 612-321-8390. I love having these conversations. Happy to talk. I do some conversations on Telegram. I'll get you the link for that. You can share with others. I have an investor little channel on Telegram, and I love that because we can share rich information and point you in a direction. And if you want to find me on LinkedIn, it's C. Morrell Stinson, and I don't know if you have a way of putting
I can share it
in your podcast.
Yeah, I can share it like on the description, so it's
Perfect.
good. I'll share all that. Well,
all right.
Thank you so much for coming on. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I love learning from you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Maritza. It was really enjoyable. Look forward to our next conversation.
Of course.